There is a plant that grows without soil. It makes its own fertilizer from thin air. It produces more protein per acre than soybeans, more than eggs, more than any crop humans have ever cultivated. 49 million years ago, this single species covered the Arctic Ocean and pulled so much carbon from the atmosphere that it ended a planetary heat emergency. It cooled the entire Earth. For 1,500 years, Asian farmers built temples to honor it. They held annual festivals celebrating its power. And today, in the United States, the federal government has classified it as a noxious weed, a pest to be eradicated. The same plant that once saved a planet and fed civilizations for millennia is now illegal to transport across state lines. Why? Because in the 20th century, the chemical industry discovered something dangerous. They discovered that this plant could replace everything they were selling. And the easiest way to protect profits was to bury the competition. Welcome to Nature Hidden Beneath. If you are new here, consider subscribing and hit the bell. Drop a comment below telling us what forgotten plant you want us to investigate next. Every interaction helps more people discover what they tried to make us forget. The archive begins floating on still water. Picture a pond covered in what looks like green velvet. Tiny fronds no larger than a grain of rice cluster together in dense mats that spread across the surface. From a distance, it resembles moss. Up close, each plant reveals delicate, overlapping leaves arranged like miniature shingles. This is Azolla, the mosquito fern. Hidden within its tissues lives the oldest partnership in the plant kingdom. Nestled inside specialized cavities in every Azolla leaf dwells a microscopic organism called Anabaena azolli. This cyanobacterium has been passing from Azolla parent to offspring for over 100 million years. Unlike any other plant symbiosis known to science, this one is inherited directly. The two organisms have co-evolved so completely that neither can survive without the other. And together they perform a trick that should be impossible. They pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and convert it into fertilizer. No soil required, no synthetic inputs, just water, sunlight, and air. The numbers are staggering. Legumes like soybeans, long celebrated for nitrogen fixation, produce roughly 400 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. Azolla produces 1,100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year, nearly 3 times as much. A study published in the Journal of the Science of Food and Agriculture measured protein content at 19 to 30% of dry weight. For comparison, whole eggs contain about 13% protein, and soybeans contain about 36% protein. But soybeans require fertile soil, irrigation, and an entire growing season. Azolla doubles its biomass every 2 to 3 days. Under optimal conditions, it can yield 9 tons of protein per hectare per year. No other food source on Earth comes close. Travel now to the Fujian province of southern China. The year is 540 CE. A scholar named Jia Sixi is compiling an agricultural encyclopedia called Qimen Yaoshu, Essential Techniques for the Welfare of the People. Among the hundreds of farming methods he documents is a practice already ancient by his time. Rice farmers are growing a floating fern alongside their paddies. When they incorporate this fern into the soil, their rice yields increase dramatically. They need no other fertilizer. This is the earliest written record of Azolla cultivation, but the practice itself stretches back thousands of years. In northern Vietnam, villages built temples to honor this plant. Wooden idols carved in its likeness stood in shrines where farmers came to pay respect. In the village of Beach Du, an annual festival celebrated the harvest of what locals called Bao Giong. Only a handful of families knew the secret of keeping Azolla alive through the brutal summer heat. They guarded this knowledge through systems of inheritance, passing techniques from generation to generation. Farmers from distant provinces would travel to these villages each year to purchase starter cultures because their own plants had perished. The knowledge was spreading. By 1973, the Vietnamese government had established over 100 depots to cultivate and distribute Azolla. 500,000 hectares of rice paddies in northern Vietnam used this living fertilizer. Yields increased by 20% or more. The knowledge was spreading. Picture the nutritional profile. Researchers at Penn State University published findings in 2024 confirming what Asian farmers knew for centuries. The Carolina strain, native to the eastern United States, contains significant protein with apparent digestibility of 78%. The plant provides vitamin A, vitamin B12, beta-carotene, iron, calcium, magnesium, and essential amino acids in proportions superior to soybean. Lead researcher Daniel Winstead described it as having a crisp texture and neutral taste. It can be eaten raw in salads, cooked like spinach, or dried and ground into flour. A complete food source that requires nothing but water to grow. But the story of Azolla extends far beyond human agriculture. 49 million years ago, during the Middle Eocene epoch, the Arctic Ocean was unrecognizable. Palm trees lined its shores. Crocodiles swam in warm tropical waters. The global average temperature was 8 degrees Celsius higher than today. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels had reached 3,500 parts per million, nearly 9 times current levels. The planet was locked in a runaway greenhouse state. Then something extraordinary happened. Due to continental drift, the Arctic Ocean had become almost entirely landlocked. Greenland, Europe, Asia, and North America formed a ring around this enclosed sea. Heavy rainfall carried fresh water from rivers into the basin, creating a thin layer of low salinity water floating on the denser ocean beneath. This freshwater lens was all Azolla needed. The fern colonized the Arctic surface and began to spread. Picture 4 million square kilometers of water, an area larger than India, slowly turning green as floating mats of Azolla expanded across the entire basin. In 2004, a scientific expedition called the Arctic Coring Expedition sailed to the Lomonosov Ridge near the North Pole. The research vessel Vidar Viking drilled into sediments beneath the Arctic seabed and extracted cores stretching back 80 million years. Scientists aboard made a discovery that rewrote climate history. Layer after layer of the cores contained nothing but fossilized Azolla remains, 8 meters thick at minimum, perhaps 20 meters or more. The bottom of the deposit was never reached. Scientist Henk Brinkhuis, now director of the Royal Netherlands Institute for Sea Research, examined the samples and found hundreds of thousands of fossils that looked like slimy balls with spaghetti strings sticking out. These were Azolla spores perfectly preserved in sediment. The plants had grown, died, and sunk to the anoxic seafloor, where lack of oxygen prevented decomposition. For 800,000 years, this cycle continued. Azolla grew on the surface, absorbed carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, died, and carried that carbon to the bottom of the sea, permanently. The atmospheric record tells the rest of the story. During the Azolla event, carbon dioxide levels plummeted from 3,500 parts per million to 650 parts per million, an 80% reduction. This drawdown triggered a cascade of planetary cooling. Arctic surface water temperatures dropped from 13 degrees Celsius to -9 degrees Celsius. The poles began to freeze. Antarctica developed its first permanent ice sheets. The transition from greenhouse Earth to icehouse Earth had begun. One tiny floating fern had reshaped the climate of an entire planet. Consider what this means for our current crisis. Today, atmospheric carbon dioxide sits around 420 parts per million and climbing. Scientists estimate that each 1 hectare Azolla pond can capture over 21,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide annually. Researchers at the Climate Foundation and universities worldwide are investigating whether Azolla could help reverse modern warming. The plant that ended a planetary heat emergency 50 million years ago might have something to teach us about the one we face today. But here is where the vault grows dark. In 1909, German chemists Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch developed a process for synthesizing ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen. This breakthrough earned Haber the Nobel Prize and changed human civilization forever. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer enabled the agricultural intensification that fed a rapidly growing global population. It also created a $200 billion industry dependent on fossil fuels and chemical manufacturing. Before the 1960s, Chinese farmers used Azolla on over 1,300,000 hectares of rice paddies. The plant provided free nitrogen, suppressed weeds, reduced water evaporation, and improved soil structure. Then synthetic fertilizers arrived. Government subsidies made chemical nitrogen artificially cheap. Agricultural extension programs promoted modern inputs over traditional practices. Within a generation, Azolla cultivation collapsed. The same pattern repeated worldwide, in Vietnam, in India, across Southeast Asia. By 2020, global nitrogen fertilizer consumption had doubled from 1970 levels. Meanwhile, over half of all applied synthetic nitrogen never reaches the crops it was meant to feed. It leaches into groundwater, it runs off into rivers and oceans, it volatilizes into the atmosphere as nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Picture the Gulf of Mexico. Every summer, a dead zone forms off the coast of Louisiana, an area exceeding 17,000 square kilometers, where oxygen levels drop so low that fish and shrimp cannot survive. The cause is nutrient runoff from farms throughout the Mississippi River watershed. Nitrogen and phosphorus from synthetic fertilizers flow downstream, triggering massive algae blooms that deplete oxygen as they decompose. The United Nations has identified these dead zones as one of the most significant environmental threats facing the planet. Some exceed 70,000 square kilometers, and they are growing. Now examine the regulatory landscape in the United States. The Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service of the USDA maintains a federal noxious weed list. Among the species classified as threats requiring eradication is Azolla pinnata, the feathered mosquito fern, the same species that Vietnamese farmers honored in temples, the same species that Chinese agricultural texts documented 15 centuries ago, the same species that could replace a significant portion of synthetic nitrogen use. It is now illegal to transport across state lines. The justification for this classification is that Azolla can form dense mats that alter aquatic ecosystems. This is true. The plant grows aggressively. It can double its coverage in days. It reduces light penetration and changes oxygen dynamics in water bodies. These are legitimate ecological concerns. But consider the framing. A plant that blocks light is labeled invasive and banned. Meanwhile, synthetic fertilizer runoff creates dead zones the size of small countries, and no one classifies that as an ecological threat requiring prohibition. The pattern should look familiar. White clover was removed from American seed mixes and rebranded as a weed after chemical companies began selling herbicides to kill it. Jerusalem artichoke was marginalized despite outperforming potatoes in yield because it could not be mechanized and monetized. Azolla joined this list of buried abundance, plants that work too well, that cost too little, that threaten the profit margins of industries built on scarcity. But here is what they did not count on. Azolla refuses to disappear. In Tamil Nadu, India, the Natural Resources Development Project has spent decades teaching smallholder farmers to cultivate Azolla in backyard ponds. The method is simple. Dig a shallow pit 2 meters by 2 meters. Line it with plastic sheeting. Add 10 centimeters of water, some soil, and a small amount of cow dung for phosphorus. Introduce a starter culture of Azolla. Within 2 weeks, the surface is covered. Harvest daily by scooping excess biomass with a plastic sieve. Feed it fresh to dairy cattle mixed with regular fodder. Milk yields increase 15 to 20%. Feed costs drop dramatically. Farmers across India are adopting this practice not because governments recommend it, but because it works. In the Senegal River Valley, researchers published findings in 2025 demonstrating that Azolla can replace 1/4 of synthetic urea applications while maintaining or increasing rice yields. Farmers in the study reported lower input costs and greater food security. The knowledge is spreading through Africa, just as it once spread through Asia, not through corporate promotion, but through farmer-to-farmer networks sharing what actually works. In laboratories from Beijing to Boston, scientists are investigating Azolla for applications beyond agriculture. Chinese researchers have demonstrated that 16 square meters of Azolla cultivation provides enough oxygen for 2 adults in a closed ecological life support system. NASA has studied related species for potential use in space colonies. Biosphere 2, the famous closed ecosystem experiment in Arizona, used Azolla as a protein source for fish and poultry. The plant that grew without soil on a distant planet 50 million years ago might help us colonize others. The question is not whether Azolla works. 15 centuries of documented agricultural use prove that it works. The question is not whether it is safe. Billions of people across Asia have consumed it directly or eaten animals raised on it. The question is not whether modern science validates traditional knowledge. Peer-reviewed studies in respected journals confirm everything farmers knew all along. The question is simply this: who benefits when free resources are classified as threats? Picture a world where every farm pond produces its own nitrogen fertilizer, where smallholder farmers no longer depend on volatile global commodity markets for inputs, where protein grows on water and air with no environmental footprint, where the dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico begin to shrink because nitrogen no longer pours off agricultural fields. This is not fantasy. This is what Azolla offers. This is what they buried. The plant is still out there, floating on ponds and ditches across 6 continents, doubling every few days, making protein from nothing, fixing nitrogen from air, waiting for someone to remember. 49 million years ago, it cooled a burning planet. 1,500 years ago, it fed civilizations. Today, it sits on a list of noxious weeds. The vault is open now. The question is whether you will believe the label they gave it, or whether you will grow it anyway and discover what they spent a century teaching you to forget.